There is a moment that happens in almost every relationship. You're sitting across from someone you love, and they say something small, maybe even harmless, and something in you ignites. Your jaw tightens. Your mind starts drafting a rebuttal before they've even finished their sentence. And in that moment, you have a choice that will determine not just the next 5 minutes of your relationship, but possibly its entire future. 2,000 years ago, a Roman emperor, a former slave, and a Roman statesman discovered the answer to that moment, and it had nothing to do with who was right. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will never enter an argument with someone you love the same way again. Welcome back to Wisdom of the Stoics, the place where ancient philosophy meets modern life. If you're new here, we take the timeless teachings of Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca, and we apply them directly to the struggles you're facing today, at work, within yourself, and yes, in your relationships. If that sounds like something you need, hit subscribe, because what you're about to hear might just save the most important relationship in your life. Let's be honest about something most relationship advice won't tell you. Love is not the hard part. Falling for someone, feeling that spark, building a life together in the early days, that part is almost effortless. The hard part is what comes after. The hard part is Tuesday. It's the dishes left in the sink for the third night in a row. It's the comment about your mother that wasn't meant to sting, but did anyway. It's the silence that grows between two people who used to talk for hours. The Stoics, strangely enough, never wrote a relationship guide. Marcus Aurelius didn't pen 5 ways to communicate better with your spouse. Epictetus didn't write a chapter 1 date night. And yet, if you read their work carefully, you find something remarkable. Nearly every principle they developed for living a peaceful, resilient life applies with startling precision to the way we love one another. Because at its core, a relationship is just two minds trying to coexist. And that is exactly the kind of problem Stoicism was built to solve. Today, we're going to walk through 8 Stoic rules that, if applied with patience and honesty, can transform a relationship from a battlefield of egos into a genuine sanctuary. Some of these ideas will challenge you. A few might even make you uncomfortable because they ask you to look at your own role in the conflicts you've been blaming on someone else. But if you're willing to sit with that discomfort, what's on the other side is worth it. Let's begin. Epictetus opened his entire philosophy with one sentence that should be tattooed on the inside of every wedding ring. Some things are within our control and some things are not. Here is the truth almost nobody wants to hear in a relationship. You cannot control your partner. Not their mood when they walk through the door. Not their past traumas that occasionally surface in arguments that seem to have nothing to do with you. Not their tone of voice, their habits, their forgetfulness, their way of loving you that might look different from how you imagined love should look. And yet, how much of our relational suffering comes from exactly this? We try to control, we push, we nag, we sigh loudly hoping they'll change without us having to ask directly. We replay conversations in our heads, scripting the version where they finally understand, finally apologize the right way, finally become who we wish they were. Picture a woman named Alina, married 7 years. Her husband, Daniel, is a kind man, but disorganized. He loses his keys constantly, forgets anniversaries unless reminded twice, leaves cabinet doors open like small monuments to his distraction. For years, Alina treated this as a battle to be won. Every forgotten task became evidence in a case she was building. He doesn't care enough. Every reminder turned into a small war. She would lie awake some nights, genuinely believing that if she just found the right words, the right level of frustration, the right ultimatum, He would finally change into someone tidier, more attentive, more like the partner she'd imagined. He didn't change. Not because he didn't love her. He did, deeply, but because some things about a person are simply woven into who they are. And the more she fought that reality, the more exhausted and resentful she became. Epictetus would say Alina was suffering not because of Daniel's forgetfulness, but because of her own refusal to accept what was and wasn't hers to control. His habits, not in her control. Her response to them, entirely in her control. Whether she chose a partner whose flaws she could live with peacefully, or whether she spent her life at war with traits that weren't going anywhere. That choice belonged to her alone. This is not resignation. This is not just accept bad treatment. There's a critical distinction here that we'll come back to later in this video. The dichotomy of control is not a free pass for your partner to mistreat you. It's a tool for distinguishing between what genuinely warrants action, like setting a boundary, and what simply requires acceptance, like the fact that your partner processes emotions differently than you do. Ask yourself something honestly right now. What percentage of your relationship friction comes from trying to control something that was never yours to control in the first place? Drop your honest answer in the comments. I promise you're not the only one whose number is uncomfortably high. Seneca practiced something called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Before any significant undertaking, he would mentally rehearse what could go wrong, not to become pessimistic, but to remove the element of shock when difficulty inevitably arrived. Apply this to love and something interesting happens. Most people enter relationships expecting an uninterrupted upward slope of happiness. They are shocked, genuinely wounded, by the first real conflict, as if it's proof the relationship is broken, rather than proof the relationship is real. They treat disagreement as a betrayal of some unspoken promise that love should always feel effortless. But Seneca knew something most modern couples forget. Friction is not the opposite of intimacy. Friction is the texture of it. Consider a couple, James and Priya, 3 months into living together for the first time. James grew up in a loud household where disagreements were shouted and resolved within the hour. Priya grew up in a quiet household where conflict simmered silently for days before anyone addressed it. Neither method is wrong. But when they first started living together, every disagreement felt catastrophic to both of them. James panicked at Priya's silence, reading abandonment into it. Priya panicked at James's raised voice, reading anger into what was, for him, simply normal volume. If either of them had practiced premeditatio malorum, if they had sat down before move, in day and asked, what kinds of friction are likely to happen given how differently we were raised? The first real argument wouldn't have felt like a crisis. It would have felt like exactly what they predicted. The natural cost of merging two different histories into one shared life. Here's a practical exercise you can try this week. Before a difficult conversation with your partner about money, about family, about anything sensitive, spend 2 minutes beforehand imagining the worst version of how it could go. Not to dread it, but to rehearse your own calm response to it. Seneca wrote to a grieving friend that nothing should come as a surprise to us. Our minds should run ahead of events and consider every possibility before it happens. The couple who expects difficulty handles it like weather. The couple who expects perpetual ease experiences every storm as a flood. If you've ever had a fight that felt bigger than it should have simply because you were shocked it was happening at all, you'll want to remember this section for our next point. There's a word in Stoic philosophy that really makes it into mainstream conversation, and it might be the single most important concept for relational peace. Prohairesis. It refers to your faculty of judgment, your will, your capacity to choose how you respond to anything that happens to you. The Stoics considered this faculty inviolable. No external event, no other person could reach in and force a particular reaction out of you, without your consent. This matters enormously in relationships, because we so often hand this faculty away without even realizing it. You ruined my whole evening. You made me say those things. You're the reason I lost my temper. Listen to the language we use after a fight. It's almost always language of surrender, as if our partner reached into our chest and operated us like a puppet. Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire, surrounded by people who disappointed him constantly, disloyal advisors, incompetent generals, a difficult adopted brother in Lucius Verus, wrote to himself that no one can compel my mind to act against its judgment. He understood that his peace was not something other people could take from him unless he handed it over willingly. Think about a couple, Marco and his wife Teresa, who'd been together for over a decade. Every visit to Marco's parents would end the same way. His mother would make a passive comment about how the house should be run. Teresa's old wound about feeling judged would flare, and the entire 90-minute car ride home would be tense and silent. For years, Teresa believed this outcome was inevitable, that Marco's mother's comments simply caused her bad mood. Full stop, end of story. But here's the Stoic reframe, and it changes everything. It was never the comment itself. It was Teresa's interpretation of the comment and her choice, often made unconsciously, almost automatically, to let that interpretation dictate 90 minutes of silence. The comment was outside her control. Her prohairesis, her inner judgment, was entirely hers. Once she began to notice the gap between the event and her reaction, even just a half-second of awareness, she found she had a choice she never knew existed. This doesn't mean comments don't hurt, or that you should pretend to be unaffected by everything. It means recognizing that the space between what happens and how you respond is sacred ground, and it belongs entirely to you. Nobody, not your partner, not their family, not even their worst moment, can occupy that space unless you let them in. If you've ever blamed someone else for ruining your night, I want you to sit with this idea for a moment, because we're about to build on it directly. Friedrich Nietzsche popularized a phrase that echoes one of the deepest principles of Stoic philosophy: amor fati, the love of fate. It does not mean merely accepting life as it unfolds. It means embracing it completely, loving reality exactly as it is instead of constantly wishing it were different. This idea becomes especially powerful when applied to relationships, because many of our greatest disappointments are born not from reality, but from our refusal to see it clearly. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Many people fall in love with an idea long before they truly fall in love with a person. They become attached to an image, a perfect version created from movies, social media, childhood dreams, or personal desires. Then, without realizing it, they spend years comparing their partner to that imaginary standard. Every difference feels like a disappointment. Every flaw becomes evidence that something is missing. Instead of appreciating the person standing beside them, they quietly mourn someone who never existed in the first place. Marcus Aurelius taught that peace comes from loving what has been given to you rather than endlessly craving what has not. In relationships, this means learning to value your partner for who they truly are, their strengths, imperfections, history, fears, and unique way of expressing love. Real love begins where fantasy ends. Consider the story of Robert. During the first 4 years of his marriage, he often felt disappointed that his wife was not emotionally expressive. He had grown up believing that love should always sound poetic and dramatic because that was the message repeated by romantic films and novels. Every anniversary, he secretly hoped for heartfelt speeches and grand emotional gestures. Instead, his wife gave practical, thoughtful gifts and quietly took care of everyday responsibilities. She never knew she was being measured against an invisible standard she could never meet. Everything changed when Robert finally understood how she naturally expressed love. She remembered his favorite coffee every morning without asking. She handled stressful situations before they overwhelmed him. During his hardest seasons, she remained calm, dependable, and present without demanding recognition. Those quiet actions were not a lack of love. They were her love. The moment he stopped chasing an imaginary partner and began practicing amor fati, his marriage transformed completely. His wife had not changed. His perception had. This does not mean lowering your standards or accepting disrespect, dishonesty, or emotional abuse. Healthy boundaries will always matter. But before assuming your relationship is lacking, ask yourself an honest question. Are you rejecting genuine love simply because it arrives in a different form than you expected? Are you grieving a fantasy while overlooking the real person who has chosen to stand beside you every single day? Sometimes the relationship does not need a different partner. Sometimes it only needs clearer eyes. The Stoics practiced an exercise that, at first glance, can seem unsettling, almost morbid. Yet, beneath its surface lies one of the most life-affirming habits ever developed. They called it negative visualization. The idea was simple. From time to time, imagine losing something you deeply value. Not to frighten yourself, not to invite anxiety, and certainly not to become trapped in fear, but to awaken yourself from the dangerous sleep of taking life for granted. Because one of the quietest tragedies of the human experience is this: we almost always realize the value of something only after it is gone. The Stoics wanted to reverse that pattern. They wanted gratitude to arrive before loss, not after it. Nowhere is this lesson more important than in our closest relationships. Think back to the beginning of your relationship. Remember how a single message from that person could brighten your entire day. How hearing their voice felt exciting. How holding their hand seemed almost unbelievable. You noticed everything. Their smile, their laugh, the tiny expressions on their face. The way they looked at you across a crowded room. Nothing felt ordinary. But time has a quiet way of changing our attention. The laugh that once made your heart race slowly becomes background noise. The familiar good morning becomes expected. The hand that once felt electric inside yours gradually becomes just another hand. Not because love disappeared, but because familiarity has a strange ability to make miracles feel ordinary. This isn't evidence that you're a bad partner. It isn't proof that your relationship has failed. It's simply one of the oldest tendencies of the human mind. Novelty naturally captures our attention. Routine quietly fades into the background. And if we are not careful, appreciation slowly gives way to assumption. We stop noticing what has remained constant. We begin focusing only on what is missing instead of what is still present. Seneca understood this deeply. While writing to friends who were grieving profound losses, he observed that human beings often suffer more in imagination than in reality. Yet he also turned that insight in a remarkably constructive direction. Instead of allowing imagination to create unnecessary fear, use it to create deeper gratitude. Occasionally imagine life without the people you love. Not every day, not obsessively, not as an anxious ritual, but deliberately, briefly, gently, as a reminder. Because the mind that can imagine absence begins to see presence with fresh eyes. There is a story that beautifully captures this truth. A woman named Catherine had been married for more than 20 years. Like many long marriages, theirs was filled with countless ordinary moments, Some joyful, some frustrating, some completely forgettable. One ordinary Tuesday, everything changed. She received a phone call informing her that her husband had been involved in a serious car accident. For the next 3 hours, she waited at the hospital with no certainty about what would happen. Every minute felt endless. Every unanswered question grew heavier. Fortunately, he survived. After weeks of recovery, he returned home and eventually regained his health. Years later, reflecting on that experience, Catherine shared a sentence that stayed with countless people. She said, "For 20 years, I complained about the way he chewed his food. Sitting in that waiting room, I would have given anything just to hear it one more time." What changed? Not her husband, not his habits, only her perspective. The very thing that had once irritated her became something she desperately wished she could experience again. That is the strange gift hidden inside negative visualization. It allows you to borrow the wisdom that tragedy often teaches, without first requiring tragedy to happen. You do not need a hospital waiting room to remember what truly matters. You do not need loss to discover gratitude. You do not have to wait until someone's chair sits empty before realizing how much their presence quietly filled your life. Tonight, before you fall asleep, try something remarkably simple. Close your eyes, take one slow breath, then spend just 60 seconds imagining your life without the person you love. Imagine waking up tomorrow and hearing no familiar voice. Imagine the empty chair across the table, the silence where laughter used to live, the messages that never arrive. Not to frighten yourself, not to convince yourself something terrible will happen, simply to remember what your ordinary days already contain. Then open your eyes. Tomorrow morning, when you see them making coffee, or hear them talking from another room, or notice the little habits you've stopped paying attention to, watch what changes. You may find yourself smiling at things that irritated you yesterday. You may discover gratitude hiding inside routines that once felt invisible. You may realize that what you have been calling ordinary is, in fact, something millions of people would give almost anything to experience again. This is the quiet power of the Stoic exercise. It doesn't force appreciation through guilt. It doesn't lecture you into being grateful. It doesn't ask you to ignore real problems in your relationship. Instead, it gently restores perspective. It reminds you that love is often hidden beneath familiarity, that blessings become invisible, not because they lose their value, but because we stop truly seeing them. And sometimes 1 minute of honest reflection can reveal more than months of rushing through life without looking. The Stoics understood that gratitude is not merely an emotion. It is a discipline, a way of seeing, a deliberate practice of recognizing the extraordinary hidden inside what has become familiar. Because the people you love will not always be here, neither will you. And perhaps the greatest act of love is refusing to wait until absence teaches you what presence has been trying to say all along. Memento mori, remember that you must die. At first glance, it sounds like the least romantic idea imaginable. What place could mortality possibly have in a conversation about love? Yet, this ancient Stoic principle may be one of the most powerful lessons for building a lasting relationship. It reminds us that time is limited. Tomorrow is never guaranteed, and every moment shared with someone you love is far more precious than it appears. Most couples argue as though they have endless opportunities to repair the damage later. Small disagreements become days of silence. Pride replaces conversation, and resentment quietly grows because both people assume there will always be another chance to apologize, another anniversary to celebrate, another ordinary morning together. But life has never made such a promise. Marcus Aurelius understood this truth better than most. He endured the loss of children, witnessed devastating plagues, and ruled an empire while constantly aware of his own mortality. His reminder was simple, yet profound. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think. These words are not meant to fill you with fear. They are meant to bring clarity. When you truly accept that time is finite, many of the arguments that once seemed so important begin to lose their power. Imagine, for just a moment, that the conversation you have with your partner tonight is the last one you will ever share. Chances are neither of you would know it in advance. It would probably not happen during some dramatic farewell. It might be over breakfast, during a quick phone call, or while saying goodbye before work on an ordinary Tuesday. That possibility changes everything. Suddenly, winning the argument feels less important than protecting the relationship. Suddenly, kindness becomes more valuable than being right. Many couples have embraced a practice inspired by this Stoic mindset. They refuse to end the day carrying unnecessary resentment. That does not mean every disagreement must be completely solved before bedtime. Some wounds require patience, reflection, and time. But it does mean choosing to leave the conversation with respect, honesty, and the reassurance that you are still on the same side. They understand that unresolved bitterness has a way of hardening overnight if it is left untouched. Memento mori is not an invitation to fear death. It is an invitation to value life more deeply. It reminds you that the dishes left in the sink, the forgotten text message, or the minor annoyance that occupy your thoughts today will eventually fade into nothing. What will remain is how you treated the person you claim to love. Long after the small inconveniences disappear, your words, your patience, your forgiveness, and your presence will become the memories that truly define your relationship. Long after the small inconveniences disappear, your words, your patience, your forgiveness, and your presence will become the memories that truly define your relationship. If even one of these ideas has shifted something in how you're thinking about your own relationship, do me a favor and like this video right now. It genuinely helps this message reach more people who might need to hear it tonight. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to Wisdom of the Stoics, because we publish videos exactly like this one every week, built to help you live with more peace, in love, and in life. We still have 2 more rules to go, and one of them might be the most important boundary-setting principle in all of Stoic philosophy. So, stay with me. Earlier, I promised we would address one of the biggest misconceptions about Stoicism. And now is the time. Stoicism is not a philosophy of passive suffering. It does not ask you to remain silent while someone repeatedly hurts you. It is not permission for a partner or anyone else to disrespect, manipulate, or mistreat you while you convince yourself that enduring it makes you wise. In reality, this misunderstanding has caused countless people to confuse strength with submission. Epictetus taught, one of the central ideas of Stoic philosophy, distinguish between what is within your control and what is not. But many people stop there and miss the second half of his teaching. Once you recognize what belongs to you, your choices, your boundaries, your actions, and your values, you are responsible for acting on them with courage and clarity. Stoicism is not about doing nothing. It is about choosing the right action instead of the emotional reaction. A peaceful relationship is not one where conflict never happens, nor is it one where a person silently accepts betrayal, cruelty, or repeated disrespect in the name of keeping the peace. If your partner repeatedly lies to you, humiliates you, violates boundaries you have clearly communicated, or makes you feel smaller every day, Stoicism does not ask you to tolerate it forever. It asks you to respond without blind anger, think clearly, and then make the decision that best reflects your principles. Sometimes that means having an honest conversation. Sometimes it means seeking counseling together. And sometimes, after every sincere effort has failed, it means walking away with dignity rather than remaining in a situation that destroys your self-respect. Consider the story of Aisha. She spent nearly 3 years with someone who constantly embarrassed her in front of friends, only to apologize in private and promise that it would never happen again. She believed that staying calm and avoiding confrontation made her emotionally strong, but over time she realized she had confused composure with tolerance. True Stoicism teaches emotional control, not emotional surrender. Marcus Aurelius never suggested that discipline meant allowing injustice to continue. He believed in responding wisely, but he also believed in taking action when action was necessary. When Aisha finally ended the relationship, she did not seek revenge or try to humiliate her former partner. She simply chose herself. She left with calmness, self-respect, and complete clarity. That quiet decision required far more strength than years of silent endurance ever had. So, if you have ever believed that being stoic means accepting behavior that violates your dignity, let that belief end today. Peace is not the absence of boundaries. Peace is knowing your worth, protecting your values, and having the courage to act without allowing anger, fear, or resentment to control your decisions. That is not weakness. That is Stoic strength in its purest form. Marcus Aurelius had a practice he returned to again and again in his private journal, a mental exercise scholars now call the view from above. He would imagine rising up far above his own situation, above Rome itself, looking down at the entirety of human life as one small, fleeting, interconnected event. From that height, the specific argument he was having, the specific insult someone had thrown his way, shrank to its true size. Try this with your own relationship. Right now in your mind, rise above tonight's disagreement. Rise above this entire month. Picture your relationship as a single thread within an enormous tapestry. Two people who found each other against extraordinary odds, out of billions of humans across thousands of years, and chose repeatedly to keep choosing each other. From that height, does the argument about whose turn it was to do the dishes still feel as enormous as it did an hour ago? This isn't about minimizing real problems. The view from above isn't an excuse to ignore genuine issues. We just spent an entire section establishing that boundaries matter. It's a tool for proportion. It helps you tell the difference between a problem that deserves your full attention and a problem that's simply borrowing your attention because you're tired or hungry or having a hard week at work that has nothing to do with your partner at all. There's something almost unbearably moving about imagining your relationship from this height. Two specific, irreplaceable people in one specific era of history building one specific shared life that has never existed before and will never exist again in quite the same way. Marcus Aurelius used this exercise to remember how small his ego's complaints were against the backdrop of existence itself. Use it the next time a disagreement with your partner feels bigger than it actually is. We began this video with a moment almost all of us recognize. That flash of irritation, that half second before a fight where everything could go one of two ways. Let's return to it now, because everything we've covered points back to that exact instant. In that moment, you now have 8 tools you didn't have before. You know that your partner's flaws are not yours to control, only your response to them. You know that friction is not failure. It's the natural cost of 2 lives merging into one. You know your prohairesis, your inner judgment, is sacred ground that nobody can occupy without your permission. You know that loving your partner as they actually are, rather than the fantasy you've built in your head, is its own quiet revolution. You know that imagining their loss, even briefly, can restore your sight to what's actually in front of you. You know that time is not infinite, and the small kindness you withhold tonight out of pride may matter more than you think. You know that peace is never an excuse for tolerating mistreatment, that boundaries and stoic calm were never opposites. And you know that from a high enough vantage point, most of what we fight about shrinks back down to its true modest size. None of this makes a relationship easy. The Stoics never promised ease. They promised something better. The tools to meet whatever comes with clarity, dignity, and peace rather than chaos. The next time you feel that familiar flash of irritation rising in your chest, I hope you remember this video. I hope you remember that the space between the spark and your response belongs entirely to you, and that what you choose to do with it might just be the most important decision in your entire relationship. If this video gave you something real to carry into your own life, let me know in the comments which of these 8 rules hit you the hardest. I read every single one, and I genuinely love to know. Share this with someone you love, not because they need fixing, but because peace is something we build together, not alone. And if you want more of this ancient wisdom translated into the language of real modern struggles, subscribe to Wisdom of the Stoics, and I'll see you in the next one.